brother invited me to his housewarming to announce that Grandpa gave him the family cabin. Can you imagine finding out that your own brother tried to steal everything you ever cared about? Well, that's exactly what happened to me. I was blindsided when Ben, my own flesh and blood, tried to claim the one thing Grandpa left me. But the shocking truth is, this wasn't just about the cabin. It was about something much deeper. Stay with me, because what happens next will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about family, loyalty, and forgiveness. Keep watching to see how I handled it. It was the kind of night that made everything feel like it was on the edge of something. The air outside was warm, but with a slight bite that reminded me of fall creeping in. I stood in front of the full-length mirror in my apartment, adjusting the strap of my dress, trying to get it just right. I wasn't sure if I was excited or nervous, or maybe a little bit of both. Ben's housewarming party had been on my calendar for weeks now, and while I'd been looking forward to celebrating his new place, something had been nagging at me all day. I should have known something wasn't right. I had always been the responsible one, the one who kept everything together. From the moment I could remember, I was the one my parents leaned on. When Ben dropped out of college for the second time and decided he needed space, I stepped in to help pay for rent, buy groceries, and all the other things that no one ever talked about. My parents had always adored him, and no matter how hard I tried to get their attention, it was clear to me that Ben was their golden boy. He was charming, always the life of the party, and yet he seemed to only care about having fun, never about the responsibilities that weighed on me like an anchor. As I drove to his new house in the suburbs, the streetlights cast long, shadowy lines across the road. It was surreal. Ben had this way of drawing attention to himself, and I knew tonight wouldn't be any different. The minute I stepped into that house, he'd find some way to make the night about him he always did. As I parked, I took a deep breath, steeling myself. I wasn't going to let him ruin the night. I wasn't going to let him make me feel invisible, not tonight. When I walked in, the smell of fresh paint and new furniture hit me. It was classic Ben. Everything in his life had to be new, from his wardrobe to his relationships. His girlfriend, Teresa, was chatting with some of his college friends, and my parents were off to the side, discussing how they could help with his latest renovations. Ben greeted me with a hug, his usual grin plastered across his face, the kind of smile that made you feel like everything was going his way. I smiled back, though I was already feeling the unease begin to settle in my chest. A few drinks later, Ben stood up, tapping his glass with a spoon, calling for everyone's attention. "I'd like to make a toast," he said, his voice carrying easily across the room. Everyone turned toward him, and I knew instantly what was coming. Ben had always had a flair for the dramatic. He paused for effect, eyes gleaming like he was about to announce something groundbreaking. "To new beginnings, new homes," he continued, and the crowd murmured in agreement. I could feel the tension in the air, the way everyone was holding their breath, waiting for the punchline. But he didn't stop there. He set his drink down on the coffee table and gave everyone a long, exaggerated pause. "Speaking of new beginnings," he said, his grin widening, "I have an announcement to make." I felt my heart skip a beat. Something about the way he said it, the way his eyes flickered toward me, made me uneasy. A pit formed in my stomach. He reached into his jacket pocket, pulling out a letter that looked worn around the edges. My palms suddenly felt clammy. "Grandpa left me his vacation home," he said, as if it were the most casual thing in the world. The room erupted in surprised murmurs, and everyone started clapping. But my world stopped spinning. Grandpa's cabin? That was our place. My place. I had spent years with him at that cabin every weekend for the past 3 years, helping him with repairs, sitting out on the dock with him as he taught me how to fish, how to appreciate the simple things in life. I had practically grown up there. My memories of that cabin were tangled up in every corner of the property. It wasn't just a house. It was a part of me, a part of who I was, who Grandpa and I had been together. I looked around the room, seeing my parents' proud expressions. Their faces lit up as if Ben had just won a Nobel Prize. Teresa clapped enthusiastically, nodding like she was part of some inside joke. My cousin Jenna, sitting across the room, caught my eye. I could see the confusion in her expression. She knew. She knew how much the cabin meant to me. I stood there, frozen, unable to process what I was hearing. The cabin wasn't just another property, it was Grandpa's most treasured possession. And now, Ben, who had barely even visited in the past 5 years, was claiming it. My stomach churned as the weight of the situation settled in. Ben, of course, didn't even notice my discomfort. He was too busy basking in the attention, waving his letter around like a victory flag. My mind raced. Grandpa had already given me the cabin. He'd even given me a small wooden box just 3 weeks ago, telling me not to open it until the time was right. It was a strange request, but I had trusted him. I had promised him I would keep the cabin, protect it. And now, here was Ben, standing in front of everyone, completely rewriting history. I excused myself from the group, muttering something about needing to use the bathroom. I could feel the eyes of everyone on me as I slipped away, my mind spinning, my heart racing. Once I was safely locked in the bathroom, I took a deep breath, trying to calm my shaking hands. I couldn't believe what I had just heard. Ben was lying. But did he know about the deed? Did Grandpa somehow change his mind without telling me? I needed to get home, fast, and check the box he had given me. I had to know the truth. I could feel it, something wasn't right, and I wasn't going to let Ben get away with this. I quickly texted Jenna to cover for me. She agreed, and within minutes, I was out the door, slipping into my car. The drive home was a blur, my thoughts running a mile a minute. The streetlights flickered past, blurring into streaks of yellow and orange. Grandpa, the lessons he taught me, the weekends we spent together, all of it flashed before my eyes. He couldn't have meant for Ben to have the cabin. It didn't make sense. It couldn't have been true. I wasn't about to let him get away with it. Not now. Not ever. I rushed home, my heart pounding in my chest. The air outside was cooler now, the sun beginning to set, casting long shadows across the street as I drove faster than I probably should have. I was trying to focus on the road, but all I could think about was Ben standing there in front of everyone, claiming the cabin. Grandpa's cabin. The one I had spent so many weekends in. The one where Grandpa had shared his life lessons with me, where he'd taught me how to fish, how to skip stones across the lake, where he had laughed and told me stories about his youth. That cabin was more than a building, it was where my memories lived, where my heart lived. And Ben? He barely even knew the place. I pulled into the driveway, the familiar creak of the old oak tree in the yard making me pause for a moment. The house felt silent, like it had been holding its breath, waiting for me to come back. I didn't waste any time. I grabbed the wooden box Grandpa had given me and rushed inside, my fingers trembling as I slid the key into the closet where he'd hidden it. The box felt heavier now, like it had taken on a life of its own, like it was waiting for me to open it, to finally see what was inside. As I lifted the lid, the familiar scent of cedar filled the air. Grandpa's scent. I hadn't realized until that moment how much I missed him, his presence, his quiet strength, the way he'd always known exactly what to say. There were a few folded papers inside, but one caught my eye, a small envelope with my name written on it, in Grandpa's unmistakable handwriting. I could almost hear his voice as I gently pulled the letter out, feeling the weight of his words before I even read them. Dearest Emily, the letter began, and my breath caught in my throat. I could feel the tears threatening to spill as I read on. Grandpa had written this for me, specifically for me. Not Ben. It was dated 6 months ago, and I could see the slight shakiness in his handwriting, a sign of the arthritis that had plagued him in his final months. He had already given me the cabin. I didn't need to read the rest of the letter to know what it said. I could feel it in every word, in every crease of the paper. Grandpa had known what he was doing when he'd entrusted me with the cabin. He had already transferred ownership to me legally, officially. There were documents in here, notarized and signed, all of it clear. I'd been the one who had spent hours with him, maintaining the property, listening to his stories, talking about life. Not Ben. Ben had visited maybe twice in the past 5 years, always complaining about the lack of Wi-Fi and the boredom. He hadn't cared about the cabin, but I had. I stood there in the quiet of the house, holding the letter, feeling the weight of it all. My emotions were a whirlwind anger, sadness, betrayal, but also relief. Grandpa had seen me. He had known that I was the one who would carry on the legacy, the one who would keep the cabin alive, keep the memories alive. I had always wondered if he knew how I felt about him, about the cabin, and now I knew. He had known, and he had trusted me. But then something else hit me. What about Ben? What about his letter? I still couldn't wrap my mind around the fact that he had stood there, in front of everyone, announcing that Grandpa had given him the cabin. I knew Ben, and I knew that there was no way Grandpa would have ever given it to him. Ben had lied. He had forged the letter, knowing full well that Grandpa had already made his decision. The audacity! I couldn't believe it. The anger that had been bubbling beneath the surface finally spilled over, and I gripped the letter tighter, my knuckles white. I had to confront him. I couldn't let him get away with this. I needed to show everyone the truth. Grandpa had left the cabin to me, and I wasn't going to let Ben or anyone else take that away from me. I took a deep breath and walked into the living room, setting the letter down on the coffee table. My phone buzzed, and I quickly glanced at the screen. It was a text from Jenna. "Are you okay?" she had asked. It was clear she knew something was off. She had always known me better than anyone else. I texted her back, telling her I needed to check something at home and that I would be fine, but I didn't think I could stay much longer at Ben's house. Not now. The drive back to Ben's felt like the longest trip of my life. I was trying to keep my emotions in check, but it wasn't easy. I thought about the cabin, about Grandpa, about the memories I'd made there. I thought about how Ben had treated it like a joke, something to be used for parties when it was convenient. I thought about how Grandpa had trusted me with it, and how I was going to honor that trust. I knew what I had to do. I didn't want to make a scene, but I couldn't just let this slide. This was too important. Grandpa had made his wishes clear, and now it was time to make sure that everyone knew the truth. I wasn't just going to let Ben get away with it. When I pulled up to Ben's house, I took a moment to collect myself. The party was still going on, and I could hear the laughter and chatter coming from inside. I knew I had to do this now. I didn't want to wait any longer. I couldn't. I walked in, the sounds of the party fading as I entered the living room. Ben was sitting on the couch, holding court as usual, laughing with his friends. He looked up when I walked in, and his smile faltered for a second. Just a second. He knew. "Emily," he said, standing up, "what are you doing back here?" "I thought you had to go. I need to talk to you, Ben," I said, my voice steady but firm. "We need to talk about the cabin." His face froze, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of guilt flash across his face. He tried to recover, putting on his usual cocky grin, but I could see it in his eyes. He knew I was on to him. "I think you know what I'm talking about," I said, pulling the wooden box from my bag and setting it down on the coffee table. Ben's eyes darted to it, and I could see his pulse quicken. "Grandpa gave me the cabin. He gave it to me 6 months ago." Ben's face paled. "That's not possible," he muttered, his voice unsteady. I have the letter. He told me..." "No, Ben," I interrupted, my voice cutting through the tension in the room. "He gave it to me. Legally. It's mine." It was never part of his estate. "The letter you have is a forgery." Ben opened his mouth to protest, but no words came out. The room fell silent, everyone watching us. My parents, who had been in the kitchen moments before, came into the living room, their faces filled with confusion. My mother looked at me, her eyes widening in disbelief. Emily, what is this about? I'm sorry, but Ben has been lying to all of you, I said, my voice firm. The cabin is mine. Grandpa gave it to me. Legally. The silence that followed was deafening. Ben didn't say anything at first, and then he slumped into the chair, his face a mixture of frustration and defeat. I didn't mean for this to happen, he said, his voice barely a whisper. I wanted something of my own. I've always been in your shadow, Emily. You always had everything. Grandpa always loved you more. His words hit me like a punch in the stomach. I had always known there was some resentment between us, but to hear him say it out loud, to know that he had let that jealousy fester for so long, was something I hadn't expected. It hurt, but at the same time, I understood. Ben had always been the one seeking validation, never feeling good enough. But that didn't give him the right to lie, to manipulate the situation to get what he wanted. I'm sorry, Jules, he whispered, his voice trembling now. I was wrong. I should have never done it. I took a deep breath, letting the weight of the moment settle in. You can't just take what isn't yours, Ben. It's not about you being in my shadow. It's about respecting what Grandpa wanted. He wanted me to have the cabin. He wanted me to take care of it. The room was quiet as I let his apology hang in the air. I wasn't ready to forgive him. Not yet. But maybe, just maybe, there was a chance for us to rebuild what had been broken. I thought I knew Ben. He was my brother. But when he took that step, lying, forging letters, something changed. Now I'm stuck wondering, how do you fix a relationship when trust has been completely shattered? How far can you go to rebuild what's broken? Do you think I made the right choice? Comment 111 put, if you think I should have forgiven him right away. Or woo22fit, if you think I did the right thing by making him work for it. The silence in the room was suffocating. Ben was sitting there, slumped in the chair, looking smaller than I had ever seen him. His usual cocky demeanor was gone, replaced by something I had never expected to see in him, guilt. I had always known Ben was jealous, always felt like he was fighting for a spot in our family's affection. But this was something else entirely. He had crossed a line that I didn't know could be crossed. The rage that had been building in me since his announcement was now simmering beneath the surface, ready to explode. I clenched my fists, trying to keep it together, but every word he said seemed to dig the knife in deeper. I never meant for it to go this far, he muttered, his voice shaky, almost apologetic. I wanted something for myself, something that was mine. I always feel like I'm living in your shadow, Emily. His words were painful to hear, but they weren't a complete surprise. I had known, deep down, that there was always this unspoken tension between us. It was something I had tried to ignore for years, thinking maybe it would get better, thinking that if I just kept my head down and did what was expected of me, everything would work itself out. But now, standing here, facing the reality of what he had done, I knew that there was no going back. I looked at him, my heart heavy with a mixture of anger and sadness. Ben, you can't just take what isn't yours, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. It was hard to speak, to get the words out without breaking down. This wasn't about you being in my shadow. This was about Grandpa trusting me. He chose me to keep the cabin, to honor what it meant to him. I didn't ask for this, Ben. I didn't ask for any of this. His eyes flickered with something like shame as he looked down at his hands, twisting them in his lap. I know. I thought maybe if I had the cabin, if I could just make that announcement, maybe everyone would see me differently. Maybe I could finally have something that mattered. But instead, I just ruined everything. The words hung in the air, and for a moment, I almost felt sorry for him. Almost! But the hurt was still fresh, the betrayal still raw. It was hard to remember that this was my brother, the same person I had spent so many years of my life trying to make proud, trying to prove that I wasn't just the responsible one, the one who did everything right. Grandpa had always seen me for who I truly was, even if no one else did. He had trusted me with the cabin, and that was more than I could have ever hoped for. But now, Ben had stolen that from me. He had tried to take something so precious, something that held so many of my memories, and twist it into something for his own gain. I felt my chest tighten, the pressure of it all threatening to choke me. "You can't just take what's mine, Ben," I repeated, this time louder, more forceful. "You can't just pretend like Grandpa's wishes don't matter. I know you wanted recognition, but this isn't the way to get it. And you can't have everything just because you feel left out. I'm not the one who made you feel that way, Ben. This is all on you." His face crumpled as the weight of my words hit him, and I could see the tears welling up in his eyes. He wiped his face with the back of his hand, clearly embarrassed. "I'm sorry, Emily," he said, his voice cracking. "I didn't know how to handle it. I didn't know how to make everyone see me the way they saw you." I took a deep breath, trying to steady my emotions, trying not to let the anger cloud my judgment. "You've always had the chance to earn their love, Ben. You've always had the chance to be who you are, not who you think they want you to be. But lying, manipulating those are not the ways to earn respect. I won't let you ruin what Grandpa left for me." I could feel the weight of the moment. I knew what I had to do. I couldn't let him get away with this. I couldn't just walk away and pretend like nothing had happened. Grandpa had trusted me. I couldn't betray that trust by letting Ben get away with lying, by letting him manipulate the situation to his advantage. I wasn't about to let him take what was mine without a fight. "Ben, I'm not here to fight with you," I said, my voice quieter now, more controlled. "But I'm not going to let you walk all over me either. Grandpa wanted me to have the cabin. He chose me because he knew I would take care of it, because he knew I loved it the way he did. You may have been his grandson, but that doesn't give you the right to steal from me." He stared at me for a long moment, and I could see the gears turning in his head. He was thinking, processing, realizing that there was no way out of this for him. "I never wanted to hurt you," he said finally, his voice softer now. "I was just so tired of feeling like I didn't matter." I could see the sincerity in his eyes, and for a brief moment, I almost wanted to believe him. But I couldn't. Not yet. Not after everything that had happened. "I understand that you feel left out, Ben," I said, taking a step back. "But there are better ways to handle things. There are better ways to earn the respect and recognition you're looking for. I'm not the one who's held you back, Ben. You've been holding yourself back." He looked like he wanted to say something more, but no words came out. For a long time, we just stood there in silence, the weight of everything settling between us. The tension in the room was almost unbearable, but it wasn't the kind of tension that could be resolved with just words. It wasn't something that could be fixed overnight. We both knew that. I didn't know what the future held for us, for our relationship. But in that moment, I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to let Ben's jealousy and lies tear us apart. Grandpa had given me the cabin for a reason, and I was going to protect it. I was going to honor his memory, even if it meant standing up to the people I loved most. I turned to leave the room, but before I could take a step, Ben's voice stopped me. "Emily, I'm sorry. I know I can't fix this, but I want to try. I don't want to lose you, or the cabin. I just want to be better. For you." For me, I paused, my hand on the doorknob. I wasn't sure what the future would hold, but I knew that we had to try. We had to try to fix the things that had been broken, even if it meant starting from scratch. "We'll see, Ben," I said, my voice softer now. "We'll see." I couldn't stop thinking about what had just happened. The weight of the conversation with Ben still pressed heavily on my chest as I made my way back to the car. It felt like the world was spinning too fast, everything moving around me while I was stuck in place, trying to catch my breath. I had always known that Ben and I had our issues, but I never imagined it would come to this. I had spent years trying to prove myself, trying to show everyone that I wasn't just the responsible one, the one who picked up the slack for the family. But in that moment, Ben had completely shattered my sense of stability. He had taken something so precious, something that had been entrusted to me, and twisted it into his own desperate plea for attention. As I drove through the quiet streets, I couldn't help but replay the conversation in my mind over and over again. I had never expected Ben to go this far. To fake a letter. To lie about Grandpa's wishes in front of the whole family. But it wasn't just about the cabin, it was about so much more than that. Ben had always struggled with feeling overlooked, always fought for attention, but I never thought it would make him do something like this. What had I missed? How had he gotten so lost in his own need for validation that he thought this was the only way? The further I drove, the more questions kept flooding my mind, and the more I started to feel like I was losing control of everything around me. Was I wrong to keep the cabin? Was I too focused on what Grandpa had given me, on what I thought was mine? Had I unintentionally pushed Ben aside without even realizing it? Maybe he really did feel like he never had anything that was his own. The thoughts were overwhelming, and I found myself second-guessing everything I had ever believed. I pulled into my driveway, the headlights of my car cutting through the darkness like a pair of searching eyes. The house felt still, as if it too was holding its breath, waiting for me to come back and figure things out. But I wasn't sure what needed figuring out anymore. Grandpa had trusted me with the cabin, that much I knew for sure. And I had honored his wishes, worked hard to take care of it, to keep it as it had always been. It had always been a place of peace, a sanctuary for both me and Grandpa. But now, with Ben's words echoing in my mind, I couldn't help but feel like I had somehow failed him too. I stepped out of the car, the cold air hitting my face, and made my way inside. I didn't bother turning on the lights, just letting the silence settle around me. I needed space to think, to make sense of everything that had happened. I had always been the one who kept things together, who took care of the family, who showed up when no one else did, but now I was starting to wonder if I had been doing it all wrong. If I had been so focused on making sure everything was in place, so wrapped up in doing what I thought was right, that I had missed what Ben really needed from me. I couldn't remember the last time I'd actually talked to him about anything meaningful. It had always been about me helping him, about picking up the pieces after he'd messed up. But had I ever really listened to him? Had I ever made space for him to feel like he mattered? I sank into the couch, my hands resting in my lap, my mind spinning. I closed my eyes, trying to breathe through the tightness in my chest, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I had lost something I couldn't get back. I thought about the cabin again, about the letter Grandpa had left me. That was real. That was the truth. I had a right to the cabin. I had earned it through years of love, of care, of sharing my life with Grandpa. But Ben, he hadn't earned it. He hadn't shown any interest in the cabin for years, and yet here he was trying to take it from me. It made my blood boil, but underneath the anger, there was a sharp pang of something else: regret. I wasn't sure when it happened, but somewhere along the way, I had stopped seeing Ben as my brother. I had stopped seeing the little boy who used to look up to me, the one who once followed me around like a shadow. Somewhere along the line, I had distanced myself from him, and I wasn't sure if I could fix it. Maybe I had been too focused on proving myself to everyone else that I had missed the signs. Had I pushed him so far into his own corner that he felt like this was his only way out? Was I really the one who was in control of everything? Or had I just been blindly going along with what I thought was expected of me? I stood up abruptly, the frustration bubbling over. I couldn't keep doing this. I couldn't keep questioning everything I had worked for, everything I had believed in. I needed answers, but not from Ben, not from anyone else. I needed to find a way to make peace with myself, to figure out who I was without being constantly defined by the expectations of others. The phone buzzed in my pocket, and I pulled it out, surprised to see a message from Jenna. "You okay? I've been thinking about everything, and I think you're right. Ben doesn't get to decide what happens with the cabin. You've worked for that? Grandpa wanted you to have it." Her words hit me harder than I expected. I hadn't realized how much I needed to hear that. I needed someone to remind me that what I was doing wasn't wrong, that I wasn't the one who had messed up. I had been living my life according to my own sense of responsibility, and maybe that wasn't such a bad thing after all. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight in my chest start to lift, just a little bit. There was still so much left to figure out, so much hurt to work through, so many things I hadn't yet said to Ben, but for the first time tonight, I felt like I wasn't completely lost. I knew what I had to do. I just had to find a way to do it. I glanced out the window at the cabin, the familiar silhouette standing tall in the distance, like a beacon of everything I had worked for. It was still mine. It always would be. And maybe, just maybe, there was still time to fix things. To fix Ben and me. To fix the things I had broken, without even realizing it. I wasn't sure what the next step was, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't giving up on the cabin. Not now! Not ever! The weight of the situation was crushing. The drive back to Ben's house felt endless, each minute stretching longer than the last. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly, my knuckles were white. I couldn't shake the images from the conversation we had just had. Ben's eyes, filled with guilt and frustration, had burned themselves into my mind. But even more so, the words he said kept echoing, haunting me. I've always been in your shadow, Emily. The words seemed to ripple in the air long after he had spoken them, and I had no idea how to respond. How had it gotten this far? How had I let it get this bad between us? I pulled into his driveway, the house still humming with life, but it felt wrong, somehow. The music spilling out from the windows didn't match the heaviness I felt in my chest. I sat in the car for a moment, trying to steady my breathing, trying to push the fear, the doubt, the anxiety back down into the pit of my stomach where I could ignore it. I couldn't afford to break down right now. I needed to fix everything, and I needed to do it now, before it spiraled any further. I opened the door and walked in, the noise from the party muffled by the thick walls. I could hear Ben laughing with some friends in the other room. He had returned to his usual self, the same charming smile plastered on his face like it had been earlier. But something in his eyes was different now. Maybe it was the guilt, or maybe it was just me reading too much into things. But I couldn't ignore the way he had looked at me when he said that stuff about always feeling like he was in my shadow. That's when it hit me. This wasn't just about the cabin. It was about everything. It was about the years of him feeling overlooked, the jealousy he'd kept hidden, and the way he had chosen to take it out on me, on something I had worked so hard to protect. I took a deep breath, trying to calm my racing thoughts. I had to stay focused. The cabin. That's what this was about. Grandpa had given it to me. He had chosen me, and I wasn't going to let Ben or anyone else take that away from me. I walked toward the living room, where Ben was sitting, surrounded by people, acting like the life of the party. But his eyes flicked to me the moment I stepped inside, and I could see the change in him. For the first time since I had walked in, his grin faltered. He knew? I didn't waste any time. I had already told myself I wouldn't make a scene, wouldn't cause a stir, but I wasn't about to back down. I was here for one reason, and one reason only. I had to stand my ground. Ben, I said, my voice cutting through the noise. The room fell silent, and all eyes turned to me. We need to talk. Ben looked surprised, but quickly recovered, his smile back in place. Emily, what's going on? What do you need? I thought we already talked. He gestured to the group around him, trying to brush off the situation, but I wasn't having it. No, Ben, I said, stepping closer to him. We need to talk about the cabin. The words left my mouth before I could second-guess myself, and the room went even quieter. I felt every pair of eyes on me, but I didn't care. This wasn't about anyone else. This was about me and Ben, and the lies he had told. Ben's face instantly fell. The confident smirk he had worn a moment ago vanished, replaced by a mix of guilt and panic. What do you mean, Emily? The cabins. No, I interrupted, my voice firm, almost stronger than I felt. The cabin is mine, Ben. It was given to me by Grandpa. Legally. 6 months ago, there it was. The truth. Out in the open, Ben's mouth opened, then closed again, like he was searching for something to say, but nothing came out. His eyes darted to the floor, then back up to me. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. "You lied," I said, my voice softer now, but still intense. "You lied to everyone here about what Grandpa wanted. You faked that letter. I saw it, Ben. I saw the way it was written. Grandpa's handwriting, his shaky signature. That wasn't him. That was you. And I'm not going to let you take the cabin, no matter what you say." For a moment, the room was dead silent. No one spoke. I could feel the weight of it all pressing down on me, but I held my ground. I wasn't going to let him manipulate me any longer. This wasn't just about the cabin. This was about years of Ben's frustration, his jealousy, his need for attention. This was his way of getting it. But it wasn't going to work. "Not anymore?" Ben finally spoke, his voice low, almost defeated. "I didn't mean for it to go this far," he said. His eyes met mine, and for a brief moment, I saw something vulnerable in them. I wanted something that was mine, Emily. I didn't want to be invisible anymore. I've always felt like I've been in your shadow. Always the screw-up. Always the one who needed saving. I thought if I could just have the cabin, maybe everyone would see me differently. Maybe I'd finally be enough. His words hit me harder than I expected. I knew that Ben had always struggled, but hearing him say it like that, so raw, so real, made me realize how deep his insecurities went. But none of it justified what he had done. None of it excused the fact that he had tried to steal from me. "Ben," I said, taking a deep breath, trying to keep my emotions in check. "I know you feel like you've been overlooked, but this isn't the way to fix it. Lying and manipulating the people around you won't make you feel better in the long run. It'll just destroy what little you have left." His face flushed with embarrassment, and he sank back into his seat, looking defeated. "I'm sorry, Emily," he whispered. "I was wrong. I thought if I could just get something for myself, something that mattered, maybe I wouldn't feel so invisible." I took a step back, trying to process his apology. Part of me wanted to just forgive him right then and there, but I knew I couldn't. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But in that moment, I realized something. This wasn't just about the cabin. This was about Ben finding his way. About him realizing that he didn't need to tear others down to feel good about himself. "I can't forgive you right now," I said quietly, my voice trembling just a bit. "But I'm not giving up on you. You're my brother, Ben, and I'm not going to let you ruin yourself over this. We have to fix this, together." I turned and walked away, feeling a mixture of exhaustion and resolve wash over me. There was still so much left to say, so much to work through, but for the first time tonight, I felt like there was a chance maybe not to fix everything, but to start over, one step at a time. The night felt endless as I walked out of Ben's house, the weight of everything heavy on my shoulders. My mind was still reeling, trying to make sense of what had just happened. I knew I had to be strong, to stay calm, but the anger and betrayal were still burning inside me. Ben had apologized, sure, but the damage was done. He had tried to steal what was mine, what Grandpa had given me. There was no going back from that. I had never expected him to go this far. I had always known Ben had issues, but this was something I couldn't just brush off. This wasn't just about the cabin anymore. It was about everything that had built up over the years. Everything that had been left unsaid. All the resentment, the jealousy, the hurt. I didn't know where to go next. I didn't know what to do with this mess. Ben's confession about feeling like he was always in my shadow hit me harder than I expected. I knew he felt left out, but I never realized just how deep it went. It was easy for me to sit there, to blame him for his actions. But now that I had time to think, I realized I had been so wrapped up in my own world, my own responsibilities, that I had never really seen him. I had never given him the space to be himself, to find his own path. And maybe that's where everything went wrong. Maybe if I had paid more attention, if I had tried harder to connect with him, this wouldn't have happened. I sat in my car for a while, the engine idling, my hands gripping the steering wheel, my mind racing. It was like I couldn't breathe. The weight of everything pressing down on me was suffocating. The cabin, the family, the lies. How had we all gotten here? How had everything we had built together, all the memories, the love, turned into this tangled mess of mistrust and manipulation? I wanted to scream, but I couldn't. I couldn't let myself fall apart. Not yet. I needed to fix this, but I didn't even know where to start. I pulled out my phone, staring at the screen for a moment before I opened Jenna's message. "Are you okay?" It read. "I've been thinking a lot about everything, and I know you're right. Ben doesn't get to decide what happens with the cabin. It's yours." Grandpa wanted it that way. Her words hit me like a breath of fresh air. She was right. I wasn't wrong. I wasn't the one who had messed this up. I had done what was right. I had cared for the cabin, I had loved it, and that's what mattered. Grandpa had chosen me, and I wasn't going to let Ben take that from me. Not now. Not ever. I took a deep breath, feeling the tension slowly start to ease. Jenna's message gave me a sense of clarity I didn't even know I needed. I couldn't keep questioning myself. I couldn't keep second-guessing everything I had done. I had worked too hard for this, too hard for everything I had built with Grandpa. And Ben, as much as I loved him, wasn't going to take that away. The cabin wasn't just a building. It was a part of me, a part of my history, my family. I couldn't let him rewrite that. I texted Jenna back, telling her I was okay, that I was just trying to process everything. I didn't want to keep carrying this burden alone. I needed support. I needed someone to remind me that I wasn't crazy for feeling betrayed, that my feelings were valid. And Jenna was always there for me, even when things got messy. The drive home felt like a blur. I don't remember much of it, honestly. The streetlights flickering by, the quiet hum of the tires against the road, it was all just background noise. My mind was too full of Ben's confession, of the hurt in his eyes, of the way he had said, he was always in my shadow. I didn't want to feel sorry for him. I didn't want to give in to the guilt, to the pity that tried to creep up on me. But it was hard. It was hard to look at him and not want to fix it, to not want to make everything better. But I knew I couldn't. Not yet. When I got home, I went straight to the kitchen. I needed to be alone for a little while, to think, to process. I opened the cabinet, taking out a glass, and poured myself some wine. The sharp sting of it was a relief, something to ground me, to remind me that I was still here, still in control. But even as the alcohol began to calm my nerves, my thoughts kept racing. What was I supposed to do now? Where did we go from here? I stared out the window, watching the lights of the city flicker in the distance. The view was always calming, always made me feel a little more centered. But tonight, it didn't help. Nothing was helping. I couldn't stop thinking about the cabin, about Grandpa, about Ben, and all the things left unsaid. And I wondered, for the first time in a long time, if I had been wrong. Wrong to take the cabin. Wrong to push Ben away. Wrong to think that everything could stay the same. But then I remembered Grandpa's words. He had chosen me. He had trusted me with something that was a part of him. And no matter what Ben thought, no matter how much he had tried to twist things, the truth was still the truth. I had earned that trust. I had loved that cabin. I had cared for it, and I wasn't going to let it be stolen from me. I drained the glass in one long gulp, the warmth spreading through my chest, and took a deep breath. I wasn't sure what the next step was. I wasn't sure how to fix everything, how to repair the damage that had been done. But I knew one thing: I wasn't giving up. Not now. Not ever. The cabin was mine, and I would fight for it. Fight for the legacy Grandpa had left me. Fight for the family we used to be. It wasn't going to be easy, but I wasn't backing down. I couldn't. The next few days were a blur. I could barely focus on work. The emails piling up unanswered, the calls going to voicemail. All I could think about was Ben, the lies, the cabin. It was like everything in my life had been turned upside down, and I couldn't make sense of it. I knew I had to face Ben again, but every time I thought about it, my stomach would twist. Part of me wanted to just let it all go, forget about the confrontation and try to go back to the way things were before everything had exploded. But I couldn't. I couldn't pretend like nothing had happened. Grandpa had left me the cabin. He had trusted me with it. And I wasn't about to let Ben or anyone else take that away from me. I spent a lot of time at the cabin that week, just sitting on the porch swing, staring out over the lake. It was my place of peace, the one place where I could clear my head. I remembered all the weekends spent here with Grandpa, learning about the stars, fishing, laughing. It felt like I could still hear his voice, as though he was sitting beside me, sharing one of his stories. But no matter how much I tried to focus on the calm, the memories, the anger still bubbled underneath. I couldn't shake the image of Ben standing there in front of everyone, claiming what wasn't his, pretending that Grandpa had left him the cabin. The nerve of it! The day I finally decided to go back to Ben's house, my heart was in my throat. I wasn't sure what I expected, but I knew that I had to confront him again. This time, it was going to be different. This time, I was going to make him face the truth, my truth. I wasn't going to let him continue to lie and twist everything to fit his narrative. I had spent so many years feeling like the responsible one, the one who had to clean up after everyone, and I wasn't doing it anymore. Not for him. Not for anyone. When I pulled into his driveway, I saw Ben standing outside, pacing back and forth in front of his house. He looked different. His shoulders were slumped, his usual cocky confidence gone. I watched him for a moment, before stepping out of the car, my feet dragging slightly, the air around me thick with tension. I wasn't sure what to say. Was I supposed to be angry? Was I supposed to just confront him head-on like I had planned? I didn't know. Everything felt so much more complicated than it had before. "Emily!" Ben called out as he saw me. He was still trying to smile, but it was forced. "Hey." I wasn't sure if you'd show up. I didn't answer right away. I didn't know what to say. He was standing there like nothing had happened, like he hadn't just tried to steal what belonged to me. I took a deep breath, steadying myself before walking up to him. "You were wrong, Ben," I said, my voice calm but firm. "What you did? It wasn't just a mistake." "You lied!" "You forged Grandpa's letter. You tried to take something that wasn't yours, and I'm not going to let that slide." Ben looked away, running a hand through his hair, his face flushed with shame. "I know," he said quietly. "I know. I'm sorry, okay? I didn't know what else to do." I took a step closer to him, my eyes narrowing. "No, Ben. That's the problem. You never think things through. You always act without considering the consequences. You've done this your whole life, and it's time you start taking responsibility for your actions." His gaze shifted back to me, and for the first time since this whole mess started, I saw the real Ben. Not the confident, carefree guy who always thought he could get away with everything, but the real person underneath. He looked broken. He looked lost. And in that moment, I realized something. Ben wasn't just trying to take the cabin. He wasn't just angry that Grandpa had chosen me. He was angry at himself. He was angry that he hadn't found his way, hadn't figured out who he was, and he thought the cabin, the one thing Grandpa had given me, would finally give him the validation he had been searching for. "I get it, Ben," I said, my voice softer now, though the anger was still there, simmering just below the surface. "I get that you've always felt like the second choice, like you've always been overlooked. But that doesn't give you the right to take what's mine. It doesn't give you the right to try and manipulate everyone just to get attention." His eyes filled with tears, and he looked down at the ground, unable to meet my gaze. "I don't know how to fix this," he whispered. "I don't know how to make things right between us." The words hit me harder than I expected. I wanted to be angry. I wanted to stay mad, to to keep holding on to the hurt he had caused. But as I watched him stand there, broken, I realized something. He was my brother. He was family. And even though he had betrayed me, even though he had tried to take the one thing that mattered most to me, there was still a part of me that wanted to help him. You start by being honest, Ben, I said, my voice steady. You start by taking responsibility for your actions. And then, maybe just maybe you can start earning back the trust you've lost. He nodded, wiping his face with the back of his hand, his breath shaky. I will? I promise, Emily. I'll fix this. I don't want to lose you, or the cabin. I don't want to lose everything I've taken for granted. For a moment, I didn't know what to say. This wasn't what I had expected. I had thought I'd walk in here, all guns blazing, ready to take the cabin back and walk out. But now, I wasn't so sure. I didn't know if I could forgive him right away. But maybe, just maybe, there was a chance to rebuild. A chance to heal the rift between us. It wasn't going to be easy, and it wasn't going to happen overnight, but I realized that this wasn't just about the cabin. This was about family. I'm not going to forget what happened, Ben, I said, my voice quieter now. But I'm willing to try. For Grandpa. For us. He nodded again, his eyes filling with a mix of regret and hope. Thank you, Emily. I don't deserve it, but I'll do whatever it takes. We stood there in silence for a while, the weight of everything hanging between us. But for the first time in days, I felt a sense of calm wash over me. Maybe things could be fixed. Maybe, in time, we could start to heal. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew that we had to try. And for the first time in a long time, I was ready to face whatever came next. With Ben. With the cabin. And with the family we still had. The days after my conversation with Ben felt like a storm raging inside me, one I couldn't quite calm. I went through the motions of everyday life work, errands, trying to keep my mind occupied, but all I could think about was the mess we were in. I still couldn't fully process how Ben had turned everything upside down, how one lie had threatened to destroy the family, and how, despite all the years I'd spent taking care of everything, all of a sudden, I found myself questioning everything. I spent more time at the cabin than I'd ever planned, not because I wanted to, but because I needed to clear my head. It was the place that held all of Grandpa's memories, the place where I had learned so much about life, about patience, about love, and, yes, about forgiveness. But even sitting there, staring at the lake, feeling the familiar weight of the stillness around me, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted. My connection with the cabin had always been so pure, so strong, and yet now, with Ben's actions hanging over everything, it felt different, almost tainted. I kept wondering if I had missed something, if somehow I had failed him. Had I been so focused on my own responsibilities, my own feelings of betrayal, that I hadn't even seen how much Ben was struggling? Had I, in some way, pushed him to this? It was a late afternoon when Ben called. I had been sitting on the porch swing for what felt like hours, the air around me thick and humid, the sounds of birds chirping mingling with the distant rustle of leaves. My phone buzzed in my pocket, and I was almost reluctant to answer it. But the number on the screen was Ben's. I sighed, rubbing my temple before I hit accept. Emily, his voice came through the phone, shaky but sincere. I need to talk to you. Can we meet up? My heart started to race. I had been expecting this, but I wasn't sure if I was ready. I had just begun to settle into the idea that maybe we could work things out. But deep down, I was still angry, still hurt. What's this about, Ben? I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. I thought we already talked. We did, he said quickly. But I think we need to talk more. Please. I need to explain myself. I know I messed up. Can we meet? I didn't say anything for a moment. I could feel the tension building between us. Like this was the moment that could either heal everything or drive us even further apart. Fine, I said finally. Meet me at the cabin in an hour. I hung up the phone before I could second-guess myself. I didn't want to feel this way. I didn't want to feel like everything was on the line, but it was. The cabin, the family, Ben, everything was at a crossroads. When I arrived, I saw Ben standing by the front door of the cabin, his hands shoved deep in his pockets, his shoulders slumped. He looked small, defeated, in a way I hadn't seen him in years. For a moment, I wondered if I had been too harsh on him. Had I really given him a chance to explain himself? Or had I been so focused on the betrayal that I had shut him out? I got out of the car and walked toward him, my heart pounding in my chest. There was a heavy silence between us as I approached, the weight of everything unsaid hanging in the air. When I reached him, he looked up at me, his face tired, his eyes filled with regret. "Emily," he said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm sorry. I can't say it enough. I've been an idiot. I've been so stupid, and I didn't know how to fix it." I crossed my arms, trying to stay composed. "Ben, you don't just get to apologize and make it all go away. Do you have any idea what you did? You lied. You tried to take something that wasn't yours. Grandpa trusted me with the cabin. He gave it to me, not you," his face twisted with guilt. I know I was wrong. I don't know what I was thinking. I was so desperate for something of my own. Something that felt like mine. Something I could have for myself, because I've never had that. I've always felt like I was never good enough. Never enough for Dad, for Mom, for anyone. But you... He stopped himself, taking a deep breath before continuing, his voice barely a whisper. "But you, Emily, you always had everything. You always did the right thing. And I just..." He trailed off, his eyes dropping to the ground. I stood there, watching him, trying to process everything he had just said. It wasn't the first time I had heard Ben's frustration, his deep-seated jealousy, but hearing it like this, raw and unfiltered, made it feel real. It wasn't just the cabin. It wasn't just the lie. It was the years of resentment, of feeling like he could never measure up, of thinking that if he could just get the cabin, he could finally be seen, finally be recognized as someone worthy of love, of respect. "Ben," I said softly, my voice gentler now, "you've always been enough. You didn't need to steal the cabin. You didn't need to lie. What you needed was to face up to your own fears, to confront the fact that you've been hiding behind all this anger for so long. I can't give you the validation you've been searching for. No one can. But I can tell you this, you don't have to keep living in my shadow. You never did." He lifted his head, his eyes searching mine, a mixture of disbelief and hope in them. "You mean that?" "I do," I said, my heart pounding in my chest. I wasn't sure where this conversation was going, but I knew one thing for sure: I couldn't keep holding on to the past. I couldn't keep using it as an excuse to stay angry, to stay hurt. But you need to work for it, Ben. You need to start by being honest with yourself and with me. You have to take responsibility for what you did. You can't just say sorry and expect it all to go away. You need to prove that you can change. He nodded, his expression serious. "I will. I swear. I'll do whatever it takes, Emily. I don't want to lose you. I don't want to lose this family, this legacy." The words hung between us, and for a moment, everything felt suspended in time. Could we really fix this? Could we rebuild the trust that had been shattered, the bond that had been frayed? I didn't know. But for the first time in a long time, I felt like maybe, just maybe, there was hope. There was a chance for us to heal. "I'm not going to forgive you overnight, Ben," I said, the words coming out slowly. "But I'm willing to try. For Grandpa. For us. We'll take it one step at a time." And in that moment, I knew that the path ahead wouldn't be easy. But it was a path I was willing to walk, as long as Ben was willing to walk it with me. The days that followed felt like a slow burn. I went back to the cabin more than once, needing to breathe, needing the comfort of the lake and the trees that had been my sanctuary for so many years. But no matter how often I sat on the porch swing, watching the water ripple beneath me, the weight of everything still hung in the air. I had promised Ben I would try, and I meant it, but that didn't mean the anger and hurt had magically disappeared. Every time I thought about what he had done, about how he'd lied about the cabin, my chest tightened. There were days when I felt ready to forgive him, when I felt that old pull of love for the brother I had spent so many years growing up with. But there were other days when the betrayal still stung, when I couldn't shake the memory of the way he'd tried to take something so precious from me. It wasn't just about the cabin anymore. It never really had been. It was about trust. It was about the way Ben had hurt me, the way he had manipulated the situation, and the way I had, for years, allowed myself to be the one who always picked up the pieces for him. I had spent so much of my life being the responsible one, the one who always did the right thing, who always made the right choices, who kept everything together. But now, standing here, facing the reality of what had happened between us, I couldn't help but wonder if I had been too much of the caretaker, too much of the one who always held it together, without giving Ben the chance to take responsibility for his own actions. Had I enabled him? Had I kept covering for him when he made mistakes, allowing him to never truly face the consequences? The thought made me angry with myself. I was angry that I had allowed it to go on for so long, but I couldn't keep blaming myself for Ben's actions. I had my own life, my own responsibilities, my own dreams. I couldn't keep trying to fix him, especially when he didn't seem to want to fix himself. But there was one thing I knew for sure: if I wanted to move forward, I had to stop living in the past. I couldn't keep holding on to the hurt, to the anger, to the betrayal. I had to start forgiving not just Ben, but myself too. Because if I didn't, none of this would ever change. I would carry it with me, and it would keep weighing me down, just like it always had. So I told myself I was ready to talk to Ben again, ready to start healing. But when the day came, when I finally called him and told him to meet me at the cabin, I was terrified. I didn't know what would happen when we saw each other again. Would he be the same Ben I had grown up with? The one who used to make me laugh so hard I couldn't breathe? Or would he still be the Ben who had lied to me, who had betrayed me, and tried to take the cabin from me? When he showed up, my heart skipped a beat. Ben stood in front of me, looking nervous and unsure, just like I felt. But there was something different in his eyes, a kind of rawness, a sincerity. For the first time since this whole mess had started, I didn't see the angry, entitled brother I had grown up with. I saw someone who was finally facing the truth about himself, the truth about what he had done. "I've been thinking a lot," he said quietly as he walked up to me, "and I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. I don't deserve anything, but I need you to know something. What I did, it wasn't just about the cabin. It was about me. About all the things I've been holding inside for years. About all the ways I've let myself feel overlooked and not good enough. About all the things I've done to push everyone away because I didn't know how to deal with it." I could see the shame in his eyes, but I could also see something else: regret, a desire to change, a genuine willingness to fix things. And for the first time in a long time, I realized that maybe Ben had never really had a chance. Maybe I had been too caught up in my own feelings to see the hurt that had always been underneath his arrogance, his mistakes. "I'm sorry, Emily," he said, his voice breaking. "I didn't know how to make it right, but I want to try. I don't want to lose this family, and I don't want to lose you." His words hit me harder than I expected. It felt like a weight had been lifted from my chest, but at the same time, I felt the exhaustion from the years of resentment, of anger, of never fully confronting what had been wrong between us. I wasn't sure if I could forgive him. Not yet, but I knew this was a start. A real start? "I don't know if I can forgive you right now, Ben," I said, my voice shaking, "but I'm willing to try. We have to take it one step at a time." Ben nodded, his eyes filled with a mix of hope and fear. "I understand. I'll do whatever it takes. I just need you to know that I'm sorry. I don't want to mess this up anymore." The silence between us felt heavy, but not in a bad way. It felt like the first time in a long time that we were truly seeing each other for who we were, not just as siblings, but as people who had hurt each other and were now willing to face it head on. There was so much work left to do, so much healing to be done. But for the first time in a long time, I felt like maybe we could do it. Together! "You're my brother, Ben," I said, my voice softer now, the tears I had been holding back starting to spill. "And I love you. But it's not going to be easy. You can't just apologize and expect everything to be okay. You have to show me that you mean it, that you're willing to make things right." "I will," he said. "I promise." We stood there in silence for a while, the weight of everything between us still heavy, but starting to lift. Bit by bit, the wind rustled through the trees, and for the first time, it felt like the storm inside me was finally starting to pass. It wasn't over. It wasn't perfect, but we were getting there. Slowly but surely, we were finding our way back to each other. "I don't know what's going to happen next," I said quietly, looking out over the lake, "but I'm willing to try. I'm willing to let go of the past, for both of us." Ben stood beside me, his eyes on the water, and for the first time in years, I felt like maybe we could find our way back to each other. Maybe, just maybe, there was still a chance for us. A chance to heal. A chance to rebuild. For Grandpa. For the family. For us. And that, in itself, felt like enough to hold on to. You won't believe what happened when Ben finally came to face me after everything we'd been through. But here's the real twist: can forgiveness truly heal the deepest wounds? Was I too hard on him? Did I make the right call? You'll want to know how this all turned out. But here's the big question: what would you have done? Comment below. And don't forget to share your thoughts, because the truth, it turns out, wasn't as simple as I thought. This whole experience taught me that holding on to anger and resentment only weighs us down. I spent so many years thinking I had to be the one to hold everything together, but I never gave myself or Ben room to grow, to make mistakes, to heal. Forgiveness isn't easy, but it's necessary, not just for the person who wronged you, but for yourself too. We all have our struggles, and sometimes we're too focused on what others take from us that we forget how much we can heal by opening up, by being honest, and by trying to rebuild what's been broken.